Are indeed live. Let's get our little opening clickety-clack going here. Welcome to Evolution Hour. We're on the road. We are not in Spokane, Washington, but over in Seattle. And I am making use of the laptop using the magic Wi-Fi of this present location. Welcome to the Troubles in Paradise, tortuganwordpress.com, World of Evolution Hour. Okie dokie. Jackson is with us, co-author. Apparently
Hello.
Screen off because presumably of the evil internet in Louisiana, I gather.
It's not evil, just ignorant, RJ.
Yeah. Part one, of course, is the exciting world of examining replacing Darwin that doesn't. Nathaniel Jensen's creationist book on replacing Darwin. And the clever fellow neglects to do a bibliography or index, so it's kind of hard to figure out what it is. So we've been going through note by note by note by note by note, and that's going to be the topic here. This next one on matters of plate tectonics, which is going to be funky fun. And then part two relates to our dear friend, Jerry Bergman. Hi, Lisa. Is one Jerry like one trick pony? Yes, indeed. Jerry Bergman had done a bit on the one gene, one protein model, and he was saying about how evolution didn't really appreciate what the reality of it was, as if creationists did.
So, I'm sorry, what?
Yeah, this is what a post from 2019 that he put up on one gene, one trait. And he tries to hijack the field as if the creationist hankering for complexity somehow rescues their irrelevance to the field. And I've got a 2001 paper on the original George Beadle's one gene, one trait hypothesis, and in relation to teasing out how complicated it was working out the genetics of all of that. So basically, it's Bergman trying to deck stack. That's the part two part of the thing. And let me, right off the bat, thank our patrons for the program. Henril and Colton, Eric Rowley, Sarah Seshi, Travis Adams, Ian Chen, Convert Me, Stephen Early, Eat Meal, James Fitzwater, History Minor, Ralph McFadden, Pelagia, Benjamin Simpson, Speed of Sound, Studio, Diemwing, Site Command, Cyborg, Doranku, Jelly, Totus Real, Christopher Johnson, Steve Bauman, Marigail Beddoes, Daniel, Insects Are Cool, the Lavender Lady, Morton Nielsen, Paul the Skeptic, Puffalophagus, Bo Rasmussen, Devin Reeves, Alex Stone, Paul Williams, and our legacy patrons at one time or another have been able to help the project. Jen, Jody, Mike, John, Keith, Andrew Dyer, Yui, Mona, Brad, Daniel, Nanya, Staggle, Sun, Skystone, Ugly German, Truths, Everett, and Atsur. All of you have been helpful at one time or another. Before we launch into the happy world of Jensen and company, I'll also mention the project that we're dealing with in relation to the upcoming Rocks for Their book, which I would normally be pointing pregnantly to the volume behind me, but that's not the case because here we are in the Montessori classroom of my niece in Seattle, Washington, using their Wi-Fi. I'm on the road. The Ark Encounter, bless them, compiled a list of all the kinds that are supposedly on board the Ark, which is about a 1,500 level thing, which is way below the numbers that were being bandied about from 50 to 80,000. Kent Hovind's favorite number is 8,000 kinds. For obvious reasons to keep the Ark not from overflowing. But what's rather interesting is that nowhere, apart from a photograph, a picture of the kind list at the Ark Encounter, do they ever tell you what they are. They don't have like a posting, an answers in research journal analysis, a background detail of what the kinds are aboard and why they selected them. Instead, all you got is a little picture, which for most cases is extremely blurry and you can't figure out what the hell it is, except it's got a lot of things lists on it. Well, I managed to get someone sent me a fairly high resolution picture of it. And apart from some of the stuff where the lens flare is obscuring some of the names from the flash, most of the names are legible and I can plow through, and I've been compiling a sweet little spreadsheet which lists off all the different kinds, living and extinct, and by their actual names. To no one's surprise, the vast majority of them are families. That's the traditional definition of kind. But what's funky is in the amphibia, where a big blob of them are actually at the generic level, not the family level. And it's looking like these are ones where there's very few examples in the genus, and they're actually regarded as a separate family from some of their cousins. They're also not in alphabetical order. So I'm wondering, why are they in the order that they are on the list? Was there a pattern to it? And what I'm going to be testing out is, are they going through the evolutionary phylogeny?
Sort of. Yes.
And
sort of. So, like, if you look, I kind of noticed a little bit. I don't know what it is broad scale, but it's just something that caught my eye, because my first thing I looked for was Proboscidea, of course. And then I happened to realize right next to Proboscidea is Afrosauricidae and what is it, the Hyraxes, and so it's like it has the Tenrex and Hyraxes and golden moles all right next to each other, which are the Afrotheres, which is the evolutionary.
So all they're doing is going through the laundry list of the evolutionary relationships and arbitrarily kindifying them.
Yes.
Yeah. That's what I suspected. Anyway, I'll be going through all of them and documenting them, and they'll probably be turning into Appendix 4 in the upcoming point 2 book that I can't point to. Just imagine my finger pointing 280 miles or 400 kilometers that way to Spokane, Washington, and you'll have it down right pat. So anyway, back to our dear old Jensen. Bless his little heart.
Bless his heart.
He claims, quote, accelerated rates of plate tectonic movement, unquote. And remember, last week, it was accelerated radioactive decay, which was basically a pileup of Russell Humphreys stamping his foot and dismissing critics and announcing how everything is going. James Downard, are they as dumb as Hovind? Oh, it's difficult to be as dumb as Hovind, Lisa. That's a really, really low bar to do. You have to almost go to Dunning-Kruger Community College majoring in can you be this dumb to be able to get below. There are a few, Matt Powell and a few others, are running in a direction that's actually running underneath Kent Hovind level, but it's a low bar to go to. Anyway,
it is a very low bar.
Yeah. So who is doing this accelerated plate tectonic movement? And it consists of another footnote of a bunch of YEC sources. We're now reaching the stage where in the spreadsheet of his source base, he's now over 20% of his sources now are creationists. And this is where, and it's going to be continuing probably to continue to rise, because from what I can see from most of the rest of the chapter, it's a glut of supposed creationist predictions and the supposed fulfillment in the sciences. And this was the first one off the mark on here. Anyway, it turns out to be a golden oldie, air quotes, prediction from Baumgartner from 1986 that was so old I didn't even have it in my reference bibliography, but I've obtained a thing, and I'll be putting the link into the material because it's available at ICR. And where Baumgartner was modeling a pre-flood world where supposedly there was just a single continent and no plate movements at all. And then he claimed all the plate movements since then were occurring in the jumbled up that was occurring because colder rock and hotter rock from the fountains of the deep and all this stuff were working. And he came to this computer model, supposedly, that was modeling all of this. Now, the fulfillment, in quotes, of this consisted of 0 technical papers that actually claim such a thing. Instead, it was one paper and a couple commentaries on it that related to just the beginning of mapping of cold slabs in the deep mantle. That's all. And it's the same issue that Tim Clary screwed up on back in his old cold slab thing, which I devoted an Evolution Hour 80 to back in 2018. So I'm going to be putting the link to Tim Clary's ICR part. And we referred to it in The Rocks Were There that I could point to if the book were sitting up on next to my corner. And also the 2018 YouTube I did on it, which listed a lot of references that you can go to in the background link. So for good measure, Jensen recommended for a broader view, in quotes, Andrew Snelling's Answers book chapter on this, which of course brings us into our turf for the rocks were there. Plate tectonics, can catastrophic plate tectonics explain flood geology? Which quite correctly observed at one point, quote, most geologists became rapidly convinced of plate tectonics theory because it elegantly and powerfully explains so many observations and lines of evidence, unquote. Without adding that Henry Morris and the early days of creationism were not in that group. They denied plate tectonics like a vengeance. And so for him to pretend as though creationists are now sneaking in and putting in the days of Peleg and all that kind of stuff, plate tectonic movements, that was really a later development of creationism because they couldn't get rid of plate tectonics. It's too powerful a technique, and it's undeniable. He can't even deny it, is dicey and manipulative and historically revisionist. And can we fill in a few more adjectives in there, Jackson?
Well, so same as usual, right?
Yeah, same-o. And so anyway, that one is really quite struck me about his now maneuvering in to put a bunch of creationist arguments in, not in the main text, but snuck in the footnotes. Like, here we got our stuff, and it must be true because it's in my footnotes, right? Because I wouldn't ever put in something that wasn't correct. Sorry. Now, Jerry Bergman pops in because of this one gene, one trait thing. And I was figuring that actually might be an interesting subject to deal with, which back when I was growing up, the primary idea was not necessarily one trait, one protein per gene was a common view. That's kind of what they were expecting. And since we have like 100,000 proteins, one gene per protein means we should have about 100,000 genes. This one trait per gene node is a counterpart of that. But both of them, it turns out, no, that's not quite how things work. That in fact, it's quite rare, I think, and you can correct me if I'm wrong on it, for a single trait to actually be due to just one bloody gene.
Yes, you are correct. So it's a near miraculous that Mendel happened to pick one which like corresponded 1-to-1 with an allele.
Yeah, and the P's people have pointed out if he had picked a different plant, he might have gotten into a completely different quagmire because it wouldn't have come up so easily. And that was before even the detailed genetics were worked out. Even a thing that has an awful lot of individual genes that connect to it, like eye color, there's more to it even than that. Even those aren't simplistic gene structures in there. So anyway,
I mean, even by the 1960s, just right after the structure of DNA was figured out, guys like Theodosius Dobzhansky had already figured out, the one gene to one protein thing was not right. Yeah, there were either lots of genes affecting one protein, or one protein, or one gene affects a lot of proteins.
And when all that stuff was developed, putting it into a complete new context. So anyway, I'll be putting a link up to a 2001 paper by John Dobley that goes into the history of the one gene, one trait hypothesis, and how it actually was so difficult to work out, and why it didn't work out, what the genetics of it are, and all that. And of course, in the decades since, it's just magnified even more so. Bergman is somebody that I have a very low opinion of. Bergman and Sarfati are both intensely ideological propagandists who are very prolific. They represent a huge block of the creationist apologetic, more so than people like Nathaniel Jensen, frankly. And that people who bump into creationism online are much more likely to hit some Jerry Bergman posts, especially on issues of racism and the supposed baneful effects of Darwin. He bangs his drum on that constantly, and so does Jonathan Sarfati. So they write a little puff piece histories, trying to make out that everything that's important that's ever been done has been done by creationists, and those nasty evolutionists are constantly getting everything wrong. And this gene trait issue is kind of plugging into that as well. And so it's always fun to see just how selectively they present their arguments on these fronts.
Right.
Oh, Lisa asked, James Downard, speaking of Matt video that was so dumb, he took it down. Which is the new one there? I haven't heard exactly which one was. I know that there were a bunch of people lighting into an awful lot of Matt's dumb videos, and memory is suddenly escaped me as to what the most recent one that everyone was dumping on. So you might want to put a little reference on that in the chat there. God, what the hell was he? It was everybody was pouncing on it, and I was taking notes about it in that before I left here, and it's just suddenly escaped my memory. It's all in my May doc file that needs to be printed up once I get refreshed on ink. But Matt. The short answer is on Matt, he never does anything other than stupid videos. They're usually about 2, 3, 5 minutes long. They're mercifully short. That's the advantage of that over your Standing for Truth, that can just ramble on for hours and hours with absolute drivel or Nephilim. At least it has the virtues of brevity. The farting dinosaurs, we discussed a little bit back on this, and I think this had something to do with. I may have had something to do with the genetics. Was it the one about Africans? Yeah, that seems to be ringing a bell too. Something about the.
I watch almost nothing that I don't think I've watched a Matt Powell video since I did my response to him like 2 years ago. That's how long
you are losing absolutely nothing in that. In fact, you are gaining the advantage of filling up that time that you would have lost watching a Matt Powell video by doing something else. Even if it's combing your hair or mowing the lawn or knitting a suspension bridge, it really wouldn't matter. It would be a cut above. But there are some various ones. I know Erica and Dan and Dapper Dino and others have done the kick line on that way ahead of me, and we let them assault a little shtick. We will be alluding to the dinosaur farting one. That was so unbelievably stupid that you have to wonder how anybody could have done it. And I think he's also alluded to the cold slab issue and some other things in that area. He's extremely parasitical. The average video he has never has any sources at all, even ones shown particularly. And so trying to fact check his argument is especially difficult. It's because he never bothers with anything that can kind of get he doesn't name drop, and he's referring to things so generically. I think the one link he put in on the dinosaur farting was to like a Fox News posting that covered it, and they got it wrong. They were hyping it up with a silly title, and that's about as far as he can get on things. I think Erica was making jokes about him. I think she was the one that was talking about one of his most recent ones, that at least he wasn't wearing the Russian jogger suit, I think she calls it.
Oh yeah. I've seen that.
Yeah. And this time he was in like a semi-dress suit and all that. And sometimes he's sitting in a room. Sometimes he's standing out in the middle of a field. He varies the shtick. There's not really a heck of a lot of interpolated material, but they're always really quite short. So it's one little virtue. Lisa says he asked if there were African Americans, why they're still Africans or something. Yes, that was it. Yes, it was a trope of the how could there have been out of Africa if there are still Africans. I think that was it. And
that wouldn't surprise me. Yeah.
I mean, remember, Matt Powell is a Hovindista and wants to kill gays. And I mean, he's just got a lot of idiotic baggage going on. And so he's operating at that lower echelon doctrinal Kent Hovind level, except unlike a Kent Hovind at least has like decades and decades and decades of claptrap that he has put up on his little PowerPoints that he can then deploy in the course of his videos that will then go on longer than 10 minutes. But Matt Powell is like vapor. And so all he's got is just a tiny sniplet that he has plucked out of some secondary source. I'm not entirely sure which. I'm not sure about Beach. It's just a sort of hint that African Americans are superior to Africans. I'm not sure whether he got into that far or not. Beach says seems to recall there was a bit of racism in it. With Matt, there's always a bit of racism in it. that kind of fits into it, which connects up with, hi, camera on. Yay. We're actually seeing it. For now, we'll see what happens on there. It just shows you what the situation. We get to see the microphone and all the rest. When I was in the pet store with my niece, I couldn't help but while she's getting stuff for getting a appointment for her dog grooming and things. I wandered on over to the aquarium section to see, you know, what prices and things were in the world, because you have an aquarium and all that kind of stuff. So
I have three.
Three, you glutton.
There's two. There's two in here and one downstairs. You know,
starting your own ocean, are you?
Well, they're all freshwater, so.
Yeah. Anyway, yeah, the gene thing, the idea that Bergman wanted to present here was that somehow or other evolutionists were in a state of consternation and flummoxery because single traits didn't turn out to be due to single genes. And no, it's that there were various camps that tried to project what the structure of chromosomes would be. What exactly is a gene? They started using the term, if memory serves me, you know, around 1910 or so, 50 years before DNA was discovered and before a lot of the things that actually we would now call genes had been identified, or that they even had the tools to be able to identify them. And so the realization that alternative splicing goes on, that meant that in a string of DNA can be read forwards and backwards and section by section with these little introns being edited out so that it can shuffleboard around to produce multiple systems. And that's one of the reasons why genomes can be relatively small compared to what's all in them. Another trope that gets banged, it wasn't in this particular piece, was the whole bit about chromosome size. Kent Hovind really does blather on about that, because they would think that an organism with twice as many chromosomes must be twice as complex as an organism with the same. No, it's not how it works.
Have you guys ever heard of amoebas? Because they have like 16 times as many chromosomes as we have. So
yeah, and that's the realization that if you think about
16 times as many genes as we have, I think is what it is.
As chromosomes and genetic systems as packages of toolkits that can be shuffled around, they can be duplicated, they can be segmented, and they are invariably being used in umpteen different functions. The one word that was popping up way back, probably predates the 1960s, but certainly was in use by then, is pleiotropy, where a genetic unit is working in lots of different things. And if you have a mutation in that gene, it's not only going to show up in function X, but in function Y, because those genes are doing more than one thing. And at this point, you know, the creationist is just going, see how complicated it is? It must be designed, because complexity cannot possibly originate by any natural process of constant shuffleboarding around and doing crap that doesn't have a designer into it. Those sorts of arguments are nice for creationists, but they've had absolutely no impact whatsoever in the regular biology department, where the unintended design, the purely automatic system, to some extent an engineering mind that is looking at how the thing works and there's no guiding intellect to it. You do get levels of interaction that go on with the regulatory genes and that now take on an information flow bit, and it's a little like what can happen in a computer programming and stasis and homeostasis systems that can kick in that are a bit like the way a thermostat or a governor would be working in an engineering context. And of course, creationists then immediately jump to the conclusion, well, there must have been a designer behind it. We'll have a lot of opportunities to be discussing a lot of that stuff. I know it's going to come up a lot in the section on the origin of tetrapods, because so much of what's going on in the formation, not only of the air breathing part and the digit formation part and all of that, is relating to interactions of lots of genes and selection pressures and environment and a lot of things, all of these things connecting up at once, that is just so far removed from what you get. We'll be contrasting the creationist version of that with the actual version, which is way more interesting.
It is more interesting. I can agree with this.
Yeah, and we've got, we'll of course be talking about Tiktaalik and all of the other various.
We talked about Tiktaalik in quite a lot of detail.
Yeah, more so than we were just kind of alluding to it in passing, as like setup paragraphs in the earlier bit when we were starting out with the silly assumption that we could get all of this stuff crammed into a single volume. And it turned out to be a bit bigger that way. But not only that, a lot of the windup and connections to things with tetrapods we're going to be going into as well, which involve cardiovascular systems, the development of lungs, and how that worked out in so many different ways, and some of the genetic systems that are underlying that. Because in a fundamental sense, none of the genetics that are leading to a Tiktaalik are appearing at the time of Tiktaalik.
Nope.
They're going, in many cases, way back, and systems that are dating back before the Cambrian explosion, and that there are relating to what's happening later.
A good book right now. Oh, yes, Tiktaalik in the side chat. A good book right now, which does talk about the genetics involved in Tiktaalik, is Some Assembly Required by Neil Shubin. He talks a bit about that concept of exaptation, how you have all of these genetic and morphological features already present, which are then being reused for new purposes.
Yeah. Neil Shubin, I'll put his little name in the doodad here, is somebody that, whether it's the technical papers he's writing or the general books, or for that matter, your Inner Fish, the video, as well as the book, any one of those, if it's got Neil Shubin associated with it, you will learn stuff. And it will be nicely explained, and it will be informative, and you're going to discover things where you go, wow, I didn't know that. So he's an excellent one. You can follow him on Twitter. He pops up in there every once in a while. But he's an excellent example of somebody that has a good explanatory style, even though he's also doing technical material. And continuing, he's an active doing papers on the developmental biology and the development of tetrapods and digit differentiation. Jennifer Clack and all that set connect up into that area. So Neil Shubin's a one to keep an eye out for, to follow, and anybody that connects up in that network, you'll be the current field.
Fun fact, I actually the professor I worked for, Dr. Esselstyn, while I was at LSU, would actually trade specimens with Dr. Shubin regularly. They would mail each other specimens. So that was the closest I've ever gotten to Neil Shubin, was through a different professor. So I just want to
I think you may be misunderstanding the uneasy part here. Every time you put down the creation by intelligence versus things got together without a regulatory process, it's that it's a topic that's huge, in that when you're talking about the evolutionary origin of any system that the creationist is likely to want to bring up, and either intelligent designer or a young earth creationist, that to dive into it involves a mammoth amount of technical literature, because each one of the individual pieces is being looked into by a body of very specialized material. And when you try to extrapolate it upstream to a simple blip level, it's difficult to condense it. It's worse than trying to deal with in some levels of cosmology, although you can bump into that a little bit in relation to like star formation and solar system formation and all of that, where there's a whole bunch of buts and this and that's and so forth and so on. But the biological end of it, I'm trying to be, what you may be taking for uneasiness is rather just the matter that I'm trying to be diplomatic. It's that the element of intelligence and teleology isn't playing any active role in the sciences. The people who are actually doing the work, whether they're theists or not, are not really invoking a teleological explanation for stuff. There may be people that may go on and write higher level expositions and books and philosophical papers where they're kind of hinting at it, but you'll discover that it really doesn't connect up much with the actual material. And so that's as far as I can go on there. We got also a Tiktaalik noting about lungs exist in many shallow water fish. Since they don't get enough oxygen from the water itself, they develop the ability to breathe air. You've got the features that also go into the swim bladders in teleos that are effectively the vestigial system of a lot of this oxygen processing thing that was going on in these much older fish. So from a biological,
we discussed in rocks,
and we'll be going into again in the newer book, because the science literature keeps piling up on all of this stuff. And even betwixt the time that we came out with our first book in early 2020, that's a lot of water under the bridge and a lot of subject matter as brand new papers are coming up in these various areas. So we'll be incorporating all of that material as it comes in to keep it neatly even more up to date for the new volume, which set for, if we're incredibly lucky, later 2021, or more likely probably earlier 2022 on it. It'll be done when it's done. The cake will be finished when it's finished. We'll do our best.
Yeah. Things go.
James Conner, complexity is actually an argument against design. Yeah. Yeah. That's
I'd agree with that. Yeah.
No one ever said things got together without a regulatory process. See, what is the I think there's going to be a funky time. Cy Gart and I are going to be discussing abiogenesis in, I think, a week or so.
Oh, really?
Yeah. Not a debate. It's not a debate. We're not debating. It's going to be a modern day debate show. Yeah, we're going to be, because he's a theistic evolutionist and I'm a non-theistic evolutionist. And so we're basically discussing our notions about the nuts and bolts of what was going on in the early origin of life. And there's benchmarks to deal with, the time frame. It's roughly 4 billion years. I'm sure we'll be discussing the issues of LUCA and how representative LUCA is. Are there possibilities for alternative biologies that we don't see today because they eventually went extinct? And all of the current research, including wet-dry cycle research on the formation of peptide connections and all. I mean, it's a busy and wonderfully active field, which is way more than you get by reading James Tour.
I mean, don't get me wrong. I like Cy. He's a nice guy. I enjoy talking to him. That'll be a fun talk. That'll be a good talk. I'm sure.
Yeah, I think it'll either bore the tears out of James's audience, because we're not going to be having fireworks. We're not discussing God or the existence of things or teleological purposes behind this stuff. We're really talking the nuts and bolts of what you need to have an evolutionary system going and living systems going. And we've got tons of benchmarks, that I'll be defending my position that I suspect there's probably about 100 million year window before LUCA of what we're talking about here. And that I cannot guarantee that the bacteria that we're seeing, or organisms that we're seeing in the very earliest fossils, 3.8 billion years, and then inferential material that goes back a bit earlier, that we can't assume that those are what we would have to identify as LUCA. Right. They could be a different form that was doing stuff, and that LUCA might actually date after that from which all extant organisms develop, because you can't tell from the little blobby things exactly what's going on inside their structure and the DNA and the actual details, because the resolution isn't good enough. And so we'll be going back and forth on that, and either you'll get a bunch of yawns from everybody because, well, they're not having a debate, they're not going after each other, taking a pro and con, they're all just like talking the science stuff. That's like, oh dear, I made this popcorn for nothing.
Hey, you never make popcorn for nothing. It's for you.
That's true. That's true. But anyway, I think we'll find out what kind of reaction it gets, because maybe James might want to do more of those sorts of things that are conversations rather than debates. Because, have they settled anything from the various debates on Dapper Dino versus the Flat Earther? I don't think so.
That was a fun debate. I mean, you know, it's not every day you see someone argue that actually the South Pole is the center of the flat Earth.
For those who didn't watch this particular thing, Dapper Dino refused to debate on defending the globe Earth. Instead, he became, for the purposes of the debate, an even more dogmatic flat earther, who is now insisting that instead of the heretical idea that the North Pole is the center of the world and the ice wall is the ring of Antarctica, that the South Pole is actually the center, and a completely different framework's going on, and all of your data would fit just as well this other little model. And the poor flat earther it was like a contrail 8 miles over. Right. He just did not get the gist of the way that he was dealing with it is the fact that it's absolutely arbitrary. Any flat Earth model you do would apply just as badly to any point being the center. And why pick on the damn North Pole when the South Pole is just as bad?
Right. Yeah. No, it was hilarious. It was very
Yeah,
funny.
yeah. And from my point of view, the flat Earth is such a peripheral idiocy. It's insanely stupid. So you right off the bat, either the person who's defending it is a head up their ass Poe, or is certifiable. Is there any alternative? But it's also utterly irrelevant because they have virtually no impact. Apart from once in a while, some public figure might blither and announce that they might be okay with flat Earth. Nah, nobody in Congress, nobody in any governments anywhere on the planet. Flat Earth conventions are not the places where you're going to be seeing the interactions with the Speaker of the House, or there's just it's off in the corner somewhere. And so, other than just the masochistic pleasure of banging your head against the wall on that, I can't see much point to it. It's a time waster when there are so many other interesting issues and ones that actually bear upon public policy. The anti-vaxxer stuff is not nearly as insanely stupid as flat Earth, but it's far more dangerous because it actually impacts public policy in a way that the flat Earth movement does. So, hi, Scott Duke. We got someone else in the show. Scott, you are watching the wonderful world of a genuine Wi-Fi. Fortunately, my niece's husband's network and their son and all that, they're mega gamers, and they have a Wi-Fi system here that will probably channel a moon launch. So what would have been very difficult, I would have had to have had a cable connection to my router to be able to pull off my show at home. You can see it's just working just fine here. So that's the advantage of when you pay more for your Wi-Fi connection than I do from the wonderful world of barely scrape by-isms. Anyway, so what's the current stuff that you're doing in the world of Jackson?
Well, we, as you know, RJ, we just did a video, Eve's Tale, where we talk about gene trees. So in a previous video, we had talked about genealogy trees, and then we talked about, we did 2 different videos on culture, and so this one was about gene trees. And so I've met some guy through Twitter, and I forget his name now. I think it's Daniel something. And he keeps. I posted the video, the link to it. And he won't tell me if he's a creationist, which I think is telling. But someone else told me that he is a young Earth creationist, and so, you
heard that? Oh wow!
Yeah,
that's amazing. Yeah, that I was just setting up the Rocks Were There promo, and normally the sound doesn't appear on that. So that maybe it's the new connection. I'll have to be careful.
Yeah.
Did anyone hear when I ran the opening promo to begin with? Did that?
Yeah, we heard it, RJ.
Well, then there's a difference. I'll find out whether or not it occurs again when I do it at home. Maybe it's because I've got the Rolls-Royce Wi-Fi connection here that it's doing it that way. And I also the window that comes up that where the chat window has other menu options, and so it may have updated. So I may be actually running on an updated version of it. And
so the next video that we're going to do, and I'm not going to tell you guys what it is, but you'll find out soon enough. RJ, of course, you'll know in fairly soon. I'm having to read like 4 books to write this script.
Bum, bum, bum.
It's a history video. We're going to be doing a video on history. So
that's my field.
Yeah, that's why I think you'll like it. I think you're going to enjoy this one, RJ. And we're going to have a guest appear for this video, so history and guest appearance.
Ooh, isn't that neat? Yeah, the my position is everything is history. It just is it recent history or less recent history? So paleontology is really old history.
We're talking like the past 2020, so that's going to be like 80, 90 years. in terms of history.
Well, that's good. Yeah. It's just like the French Revolution crowd measure everything from the French Revolution. So before 1792, after 1792, you can use that as the bifurcation point.
Did the French still use that metric for anything?
They didn't change the years. I mean, for a while, they actually measured a new calendar from 1792 on, but that kind of died out during the Napoleonic era.
That's
but
amazing,
still,
RJ.
Well, there you go. But still, the Francophile historians were still arrogant bastards, and so they continue to regard the French Revolution as the most important event, and it's well, either that
of
or
course.
that.
I mean,
in the same way that your Christians will have your AC, BC, AD bit, and Muslims measure things from their perspective. So they have an alternate calendar in the Arabic world that relates to it, and you've got all these little crossover things. The Chinese are still using the old Chinese calendar, and the Hebrews are stamping their foot. No, our calendar, 5,000 something or other.
I mean, it doesn't really matter, I guess. It's all about just pick some arbitrary point in time, and then everything is either before or after that. So
yeah,
and really.
It mainly involved. There was a line that I remember from an old history book that referred to some Muslims that were talking about the important events of the year. And it was like, I don't remember exactly, it was like 593 or something like that in their calendar. And they noted one little bit was there was an interruption of some of the pilgrims to Mecca. And they thought that was kind of something noteworthy. Okay. From our perspective, it was Napoleon invades Egypt in 1799.
Oh. I mean, fair enough, I guess.
And so we're looking at it from a different point. I was just seeing a video that John Cleese was talking about his mother, who lived to like over 100. And he was saying that her life spanned the entire 20th century, that World War I and the rise of Hitler and World War II and the Cold War and landings on the moon and all of this. And during all of that time, she managed to not think about any of it.
Jeez. Amazing.
And there are some people that are really like that, whereas everything for me has a historical aspect to it. And even in the creationism field, we've got the fact that creationism evolves, and that you have the thing that the creationism of somebody in 1930 is not quite the same as the creationism of somebody in the 1960s, which isn't quite the same as one in 1995, and it's not quite the same as somebody in the 2020s, because they can choose and they alter and they discard things and they bring in new tropes. But some of the big ticket, the e-ticket items from the old Disneyland bits are your Cambrian explosion, your origin of life, what's the mind, what's language. Those are the big ones that were an obsession of anti-evolutionists 150 years ago. They were obsessions of Alfred Wallace in his caveats to evolutionary thinking in his own evolutionary framework. And there's still the golden oldie hits that pop up at the Discovery Institute and Answers in Genesis and Institute for Creation Research. And then in prickly pear, distorted weirdo fashion in the worlds of Standing for Truth and Matt Powell and Ken Hovind and all of that.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah. So once, where I like to come in as the old fart is to remember and remind people of how those transformations have came. So one area that we will be going into, which I'm sure will be annoying Standing for Truth and some of the ones, is the fact that of the history of racism in the creationist movement, and how it's gotten tidied up in their apologetics to where you and all that just act like that never happened. But I'm sorry, when you read some of the stuff that Henry Morris was talking about in terms of the racial characteristics of the children of Ham versus Shem versus Japheth, and you get your facepalm out that whoa. And some of that still is filtering into some of the bits, like one of the wives of one of the persons, it says how creative she is. Well, this is some of the groups that are thought to be the formation of the Europeans. And then other ones, how hardworking, but they like to dress up pretty. That's the group from the Asiatic and African group. And they're hard workers. Yes, they can do a lot of labor, not intellectual things, but, and some of these are still the same tropes that are the baggage. Yeah. Yeah. That's that we're going to be bringing that into the Big Slosh chapter. I've been putting in, there's oodles on Behemoth and Leviathan. We've got tons of stuff on when was the flood, the date of the flood. And even I had forgotten how many different dates people were giving for the flood. And it's partly because the creation science movement recently, the ICRAIG, have pretty much all settled on Bishop Ussher 2348. And that's how they lock into that. But Bishop Ussher wasn't the only kid on the block, and there were other people. And so we'll be alluding to some of that. Some put it way earlier, 2500 in there. Oh, by the way, this one source that came up with that date was clearly, he was writing in like the 1830s or 40s. And he was predicting with absolute certainty that Jesus Christ would be returning to set up his kingdom in the 1880s period.
Well, RJ, maybe he did, but he landed on the island. What's the island with the guys who kill you as soon as you come near?
Oh yeah.
Sentinel Island. He landed on North Sentinel Island and got it whacked immediately, and that was the end.
That's what happened. There we go. And it never got in the papers or anything. So
exactly.
yeah. But that degree of historical revisionism and fluidity is a disaster for creationism, because they have built their entire argument on the idea that if you just add up the patriarchs neat and tidy, you get a fixed date, no problems, no debate. But the problem is you have to pay attention to only one of the ones doing that. And you can't dare shift over and start looking at some of the other texts and some of the other patriarch dates that conflict with that. And that's why there was a dispute going on this all through the 19th century, that the current level of creation is just pretend ain't there.
RJ, have you seen, there's a video by Dark Matter 2525, and it's Jesus is deciding to go back to Earth, and it's it's modern day, right? And so I don't remember someone's telling him hey, look, if you're gonna go down there, just be sure when you get there, tell them I'm gonna take all of you to Jesus, and it's a Middle Eastern man, and it's Jesus is Middle Eastern. So he teleports into an airport and then shouts, "I'm going to take everyone to Jesus," and gets tackled by TSA.
Yes, indeed. If anyone would think, oh, by the way, with your Whataburger T-shirt on there, keep that up real high and hope that we can get them as a sponsor. Even though if they pay close attention to our content, given how politically conservative they are, they may be a little bit leery of that.
Oh, Whataburger's conservative too.
Oh yeah, they're they make. I have had a Whataburger, by the way, and they are damn good. I would agree.
Oh, I love Whataburger.
They're excellent. I ate one on one of my trips down to visit my sister in Louisiana. We stopped off for one in Texas before crossing the border, coming out of Dallas, and excellent. But they are very politically, they're like Chick-fil-A. They're very politically conservative and religiously conservative things. So maybe we may not be able to parlay that sponsorship in quite the way that we were hoping. But hope springs eternal, kid.
I don't even think about it, RJ. I go into places. Well, as soon as I get off work, I'm like, oh, I need to pick up something, and so I go to the store, and I'll have people say, "Do you like working at the aquarium?" And I'm like, "What are you talking about?" Oh, that's right.
Yes. Dated or not, does the average of 2 miles of sediment on the continents conclude we had a massive flood? No.
Can you, what does that even mean? Yeah.
First of all, what it involves is you have to remember that the oceans are moving. The oceanic plates are moving. So apart from, and we alluded to this in The Rocks Were There, point to the book that is not over my shoulder, that most of the oceanic seafloor is Mesozoic or later. there is a teeny tiny little snippet of the Carboniferous that is actually still sitting wedged into the Mediterranean. I think in the Eastern Mediterranean. We have a reference to it in the book on that. And other than that, the only amount of sediment that you get on the seafloor is the amount that's come down in the course of that time since. So all it means is that's an upper boundary layer for how old the seafloor is. And if the Earth were, if it were static, then you could theoretically expect lots and lots and lots of seafloor building up. But that's not what's happened. By the way, we alluded to it in book point 2, Not Over My Shoulder. Rocks were there on the whole issue that because of the way the fountains of the deep and the water is raining stuff down, that there isn't enough sediment on the seafloor if the Great Flood had happened. Glenn Morton pointed that out years ago in criticizing some of the creationists, that he said, take sediment and put a bunch of bricks in your tub and start dumping it into the things, and it's raining down and getting washed down into the oceans, and it pools at the bottom. And so what you would tend to end up with is a mammoth amount of seafloor sediment, way more than you would get up on the land. But it's the other way around. You've got much thicker sedimentary deposits on the land than you find at the seafloor. Why? Because the sediments on the land have been able to accumulate uninterrupted for billions of years in some cases. When the pile up of the Grand Canyon, the vast majority of the Grand Canyon is the material from Precambrian times up to the Mesozoic, and then this little thin layer on the top that refers to the Mesozoic part. You have Cretaceous material on the south rim, and then as you move northward, you're starting to run into the Jurassic and the Morrison Formation that continues on up into Utah and a bit. And so it's exactly the opposite. I would ask PI 373, what sources have you relied on to think this was a problem? Could you please identify them for us so we may laugh derisively at them or whatever?
Well, look, in addition to, so just saying they're sedimentary rocks. Okay, sedimentary is a class of rocks.
Yeah,
they're not in any way all the same. They have varieties of different minerals within them. They come from different sources. They're precipitated by different processes.
Shales are a different dynamic than limestones that are largely foraminifera of
exactly
bodies.
Right, exactly. And so these are different. There are different processes which bring about these different layers. So it's totally nonsensical to just say there's 2 miles of sedimentary rock. Oh God, Walt Brown's hydroplate hypothesis.
Oh, isn't that
wow?
Sweet? Yes,
bonkers.
Indeed.
Absolutely bonkers.
Here a PI. Kent Hovind also takes Walt Brown seriously, but Walt Brown isn't taken seriously by an awful lot of other creationists. His hydroplate theory has been dumped on by tons of critics, both at ICR and AIG, if memory serves me. So you're putting and Barry Setterfield, another person you shouldn't be relying on. We get it that you think these people know what they're talking about, but you should look into the prospect that no, they don't know what they're talking about. And that's why people over in the regular sciences aren't paying attention to any of these people. That you have in-house criticism of all of their views from within the creationist community, let alone from people outside of that in the regular scientific community. So thank you for giving us some clues as to what your source base is, but you got to do better than that.
I do also want to point out that so my principal argument for why the flood not only didn't but can't happen is there's no way to explain index fossils. And RJ and I discussed those at length in the rocks were there. And we'll probably discuss them again to some extent in volume 2. But there are, Walt Brown has been refuted by both creationists and evolutionists. Almost nobody takes him seriously anymore. But regardless, not the point. The point I'm trying to make is there are layers. We have such fine grain layers, resolution in some strata, like Green River and like the White Cliffs of Dover, places like this, where we have such. Exactly. Yep. Platinum calyx. We have such good resolution that we can actually see speciation events in different organisms. We can look at these and see like they cover like 10,000 years or so each one, something like that, and you can see the very gradual bit by bit changes, and it's amazing. And there's literally no explanation for it in young Earth creationism, because you can't get floods don't order things by species. A flood, if you drop things in water, they're ordered by size. That's the hydrodynamic sorting.
There would in fact have been hydrologic sorting had the flood taken place, and that's exactly what we don't see in the paleontological record. You don't find the big clams up above in a different layer than the small clams. No, you see that's purely ecological and evolutionary in nature. And if all you do, we discuss stupid shit from Walt Brown on several occasions in our book, and we're explicitly criticizing him for being ridiculously wrong. Setterfield, most of his stuff comes up in relation to the speed of light and all of the attempts to figure that stuff. So he's going to be brought up in the cosmology chapter of the New Rocks Were There book, Point to Space, where it's over my shoulder and you can't just imagine accordingly. At least I've got let me go over and show our advertisement, since now the commercial apparently works with the sound. Okay, so this is going to make noise and I won't talk. Got music packed with facts and references, straight science answers to bent creationist questions. Yay, there we go. And that's the system that we've got going in here is the rocks were there. The PI, this is not an area that has not been covered. Tell us honestly, have you ever tried to fact check anything that Setterfield, or more importantly, Walt Brown, ever said by looking up the original sources that are being cited? Tell us yes or no on that one. Let us know. Jason Lisle on cosmology. What do you think of him? Jason Lisle is an ideological nutball, and he is not taken credibly by anybody in the regular cosmological community. And we're going to be discussing his magic stuff in the cosmology chapter of the New Rocks book. Lisle, we mentioned him a little bit in the first book, but he comes up on all of that. Tectonics says, so all Anchiornis were denser and got buried much longer than the giant ground slots. Yes.
Indeed.
Yeah, looks like one of our streams is having connection issues, so fortunately we're nearing the end of the hour, so this won't be too much of a problem if we crash and burn on all that. But yeah, PI, you've just given us a litany of a group of people who have their followers. Jason Lisle does stuff routinely at AIG and ICR. Although they get into some hissy fits over like the natural selection thing. That Jason Lisle was one of the ones that was calling Doodad at ICR, or I keep on forgetting his name, a fool. And it's really fun and games going on there. But that's another issue, is how widely do you read creationism? Jackson and I, to our demerits or merits, depending on how you want to look at it, have read a lot of creationist material. And so we're familiar with their ins and outs, and we do something that you may never bother to do. James, now a PI wants to know if Sostak has disproved evolution. The answer is hell no. He's not trying to disprove evolution.
He doesn't even work in evolution.
Jack Szostak is an origin of life researcher. And,
yeah, exactly.
He's not trying to do that. He may be talking about certain kinds of models for how higher level processes are working, and that somebody has taken that out of context and thinking he's trying to disprove, as if, if you, for example, were criticizing neo-Darwinism and you were in favor of a new synthesis, somehow you're disproving evolution. No, that's not how it works. I've never seen Szostak express an opinion that would be regarded by me as an anti-evolutionist one.
There's a popular quote mine of him where he says, "Oh yes, the tree of life," or it's part of a quote. He's like, "The tree of life is more like a bush," And it's like, well, yes, at the base of it, it is more like a bush.
Yeah, that
that's
tree of life thing. Not only Sostak gets into there, but Carl Woese, the one who was the one who was developing the new model about how the basal forms of life are done. That one, if anybody has been a vicious offender in this area, it's been the Discovery Institute. They have tried to overplay this issue on a colossal scale, and it's the point where I'm going, oh, give it up, move on. It's just nonsense. Luc Montagnier, Nobel Prize winner 2013 on water has memory, and so what?
Wait, what? Is he?
I haven't heard of that.
He's one of those?
If anyone wants to make comments about that, I have not. I don't even know what that is or how it relates to anything.
That's some non-creationist woo, RJ. He's just all over the board.
Ooh, let me write that. I want to take notes on that because we'll want to discuss that. Let me get my pen and paper here. I should put this closer. Luke Montana's Emily Water. Whee! I don't have access to my reference base here, so I may actually already have some crap on this, but I want to make sure that I don't. Okay, Luc Montagnier. 2014 Nobel Prize winner. By the way, being a Nobel Prize winner doesn't mean you don't necessarily have your head up your ass on other things. And I will look into that because it sounds like just the sort of topic to be in a subsequent book on the history of conspiracy theories.
RJ, he's a homeopath.
Oh, homeopath. Oh yeah, he'll have to go in there. That fills in.
He did win the Nobel Prize in physiology, but he also for virology work, but he also promotes homeopathy.
And was it a single one or was it a collaborative work that he won the Nobel Prize for?
He discovered. Oh no, it was collaborative. He is
collaborative.
Joint recipient with Barre, Sanusi.
Yeah, in other words, you can be doing solid work with other people, and they just don't really pay attention to the fact that you have like a weird notion popping out the side. Oh, there's old Luke again. Let's get back to the work that's going to win us the Nobel Prize. So always, now, if he had won the Nobel Prize exclusively for a genius thing he did all on his own, that still wouldn't necessarily mean he can't suffer cranial blockage of the rectum, but it would be a different category than a collaborative one.
So that statement, the Luc Montagnier, he didn't win it on water having memory. He won it for his work in virology.
Something else.
You assumed it was about homeopathy or misread that it was about his homeopathy stuff.
Yes, indeed. So thank you for bringing that up. You're providing grist for our project mill because we do want to be as comprehensive as possible in discussing all the various woos that are out there. And my niece's husband was agreeing with the concept that we'll be measuring two variables with that book. One is how head up the ass stupid it is just on its methodology. And then the other is just how head up the ass run for your life dangerous it is in terms of how it's affecting society. And so those two separate measurements are relevant so that anti-vaxxing isn't as stupid as flat earth, but it's much more dangerous.
Yeah.
And that will be part of our dynamic there. So David H., even a genius can have retarded ideas, so don't hold out any sort of hope for those that aren't genius to begin with. Yeah. You've got various people who can get a Nobel Prize in a particular area, and they can have wackaloon racist beliefs. They can have oddball political beliefs. There's no guarantee on that. The vitamin C guy, God, I can't think of his name right off the bat. This was back in the 1970s. It's just suddenly escaped my mind. But these things pop up in there. But PI, you reflect a side of authority figure worshiping and name dropping, to where the authority figure, the Nobel Prize winner, that is an authority, and I can plop him on you like an anvil. No, the data is what matters. And the context of how people work with that data and whether or not somebody has an imprimatur of they have an accolade from the French Academy of Sciences. Well, la di da. So what else is new? What have you done lately? We're a little past the hour. Check out the end of that video. The end as an experiment that I thought was a way cool way. TikTok says, I do consider anti-vax to be much dumber than flat earth because they're tested with thousands of people before releasing and are still getting tested afterwards. Well, that's hypocrisy. There's a layer of it going on there, but I simply put it as in 2021, to think the world is flat requires a cognitive dissonance level that's very different from, say, a COVID anti-vaxxer who there is a Wuhan lab. There is the fact that the Chinese government will suppress information. You do have a cloud of uncertainty initially about how you deal with the efficacy of palliatives like hydroxychloroquine, et cetera, and that lends a little bit of a fog bank where ideologues can come in and yank it up. But flat Earth is in a different category altogether, and we'll be dealing all about that. So we got all that stuff. PJ's happened to like James Tour also. Well, yeah. Try fact checking him too. That's another little matter because Tour is very confident of his position. He's a chemist who got religion, and he's convinced that the origin of life is an intractable problem for evolution, and he doesn't really proceed much beyond that. He sort of hints that there's problems with general evolution, but he's exceedingly vague on that part. And the regular people doing the research in the field, from Jack Szostak to John Sutherland and others, don't pay a damn bit of attention to him because he just deck stacks and misrepresents material and all that. And philosopher Dr. Roy, I can't think of a name right off the bat.
Are you talking about Professor Dave?
Yeah, Professor Dave, yes. Did a deliciously thorough and documented commentary piece on that says it all much better than I can. And Tour didn't like that. He did like a 14-hour response thing and just went ballistic on it. But the fact is that when I've been able to fact check the little fiddly bit details on things, there's a lot less there than meets the eye because he's deck stacking. He's arguing about the problems of getting an origin of life in an environment that is not what origin of life people consider plausible. So it's just astonishingly irrelevant. Lisa for Truth says evolution doesn't address origin of life, although it inevitably comes in. And as we have described in our work as origins or bust, that this is one of the tropes of anti-evolutionism, and it's never going to go away until and unless you get the thing resolved in the sciences. Then you'll have a wheel spinning origins issue, which is they'll have to move the goalposts to a new category to where, look how clever God was to have constructed the universe in such a way that life self-organizes. See, right. There you go. And you just move the goalpost farther down the way. We're probably closer to the goalpost moving phase than we were because so many of the intractable problems of the formation of a lot of the nucleotides and things have been whittled away as problems by the field. And even chirality is not quite the head scratcher that it was 15 or 20 years ago as they learn more and more factors that are coming into play on it. Where the ones that are going to be making the biggest headway are the systems analysts' approach to living systems, who can look at the multiple interacting things all going on at the same time aspect, which will be probably some of the things we'll be discussing with Cy in another week or so on Modern Day Debate. So that brings everything full circle. We're slightly past the hour. We have seen a creationist in the audience. I'll give you this, PI. You're at a higher level than Kenny Hendrickson in your commentary. That he was just spouting dogmas, but you at least have
RJ. This is just a Poe. He's just a Poe.
Yeah. Well, yeah, if he is, then he's wasting his time and everybody else's, or her time, or its time. We can be gender neutral on this one. Their time. My time is your time. For all of you old people in the audience, that would be an allusion to Rudy Valley, who was the super duper pop singer sensation of the 1920s. Now that's a long time ago. So anyway, That's the end of things. So everybody remember, there's an uber heat wave hitting most of the United States. It's going to be bloody 90 degrees in Seattle and 100 some odd in Spokane, and everywhere else in the country is going to be roasty toasty. Watch out for bare feet. Watch out for your pets not walking around on bare concrete, because there can be injuries from that point of view. If you haven't been vaccinated, be vaccinated, stay safe. There's mutant versions of things popping around all over the place. So there's a lot of reason to be circumspect and keep cool, keep hydrated and all of that, and don't accept any wooden penguins. And on that note, we will all see you next week from my place where I can point